My secret savings account was completely empty the day my husband Youngsu's heart was barely beating in the emergency room. The heat from my fingertips still lingered where I'd pressed the digital approval button 1,000 times. My bank app glowed with frantic lines of red and green, proof of the coin trading that had wiped me out. I sat there, silent as a person who no longer remembered prayer, the stinging scent of antiseptic mingling in my nostrils with the memory of watching our balance vanish, as if those two moments were layered over each other in my mind. And then my tired eyes landed on one unassuming phrase from a scheduled email. Final confession. I'm over 60 now. My marriage to Youngsu spans more than 36 years on paper, but in reality, my days became a rhythm between the front gate and kitchen long ago. We once held hands while shopping for vegetables at the old market, but these days, we pass each other more like distant boarding house neighbors, just familiar enough to know the sound of each other's footsteps. They call it the gray season of marriage, and I never needed a dictionary to define it. My daily life explained it well enough. After retiring, Youngsu was rarely home, while I was trapped inside with my duty to care and too little energy left to fight for myself. It all truly began with my mother-in-law's fall. My sister-in-law, Mijung, lived far enough away that her caregiving was limited to frequent calls and vague concern, while I, living close by, spent endless nights at her bedside. The clock, my only companion. The hospital recommended rehabilitation, but the costs kept rising like gasoline prices. Through those years, my secret account, a tiny refuge built from selling kimchi at the market, teaching neighborhood children calligraphy, making purses in my workshop, became my only means to breathe. That secret hole in the floor of my life gave me spare bus fare, the luxury of a hidden scarf, or a strong Americano on a day when my spirit was collapsing. But one summer, I noticed Youngsu living inside his laptop more than ever. Strange dancing charts, numbers that blinked back at him in furious reds and hopeful greens. Nothing made sense to me except the fact that every tap of his finger seemed to pull us further apart. I never confronted him, but the new trading apps on his phone, the sticky notes on the wall marked with mysterious codes, confirmed what I feared. He dumped most of his retirement money into one basket, the coins everyone gossiped about. Both our lives became a mess of clashing schedules, my daily bathroom chart for his mother, his secret ledger of early morning trades. It was as if we now lived in two different time zones inside one home, each trying to outweigh the other. It struck me then, overwhelmed people stop looking in mirrors. If you don't see your own face, you don't see anyone else's either. Youngsu buried his head in glowing screens. I bent mine against the mattress to lift my mother-in-law. Her hands grew thinner each day, while his fingers only thickened from endless typing. Our arguments over caregiving never exploded into words, but every glance and sigh weighed heavy enough to bruise. I changed bed sheets and measured her temperature, organized pills, cooked bland food. Youngsu would nod at his phone, take businesslike calls, and disappear behind his own worries. Family meetings became ceremonies where my name was called, as often as a toll on a bell. Gratitude grew cold, as soup left out too long. My only comfort came from the warm steam in the laundromat at midnight, a place where no one knew what I carried for everyone else. As care expenses piled up, even objects in our home began turning away from me. The gold ring I treasured no longer sparkled. Youngsu's wristwatch, worn and stubborn, still ticked on. Then his car vanished from the driveway, and he came home wearing a threadbare jacket I'd never seen. The house was filled with a foreign dust. My heart stuttered like a mug slipping from my hand. It was clear. He'd gambled everything we had, our entire future, on fleeting numbers. Then, at the bank one afternoon, I saw a withdrawal from my secret account that I hadn't made, at a branch I'd never set foot in. I barely listened to the staff's explanations. That evening, I doubled my mother-in-law's diapers, pushing my frustration into hard, practical work. I shoved my bank book into the furthest drawer, paper edges biting as cold as disappointment. In that same drawer, I found a tiny scrap of paper taped to the back of Young-Soo's old watch. A line of strange numbers and a single word I didn't recognize. I stuffed it into a pile of old receipts, thinking it meaningless. A silly note when what I really needed was money, not another mystery to untangle. My sleeplessness only made everything sharper, uglier. If my mother-in-law's back turned red from bed sores, mine turned blue from exhaustion. The only sound at night was the persistent beep of her bedside alarm, a noise that Young-Soo circled but never quieted. Then, one morning, he collapsed in the living room. As I dialed the ambulance, the world blurred. I felt like I was riding a carousel spinning out of control. The diagnosis was a stroke. Yes, we were now physically together. Yet somehow the weight of being together folded and refolded inside me until it felt like a book pressed hard on my knees. Around then, that scheduled email reappeared in my mind. Final confession. I hesitated, hovering over his mailbox, but I pushed it aside, too distracted by bills and nighttime caregiving to let myself feel anything. The money was gone. The trading record was unambiguous. Instead of reading that email, I double-checked prescription labels, as if the task could delay me from swallowing the truth. Here is the moment I questioned myself the hardest. Maybe all of this was a terrible misunderstanding, or maybe it was a cold, precise calculation. If it were just a mistake, I'd lose my reason for anger. If it was calculation, I'd lose my faith in what remained of our love. I existed in between, numb and bruised, not belonging to either side. In the end, my mother-in-law was transferred to a nursing facility. Even that decision became another battleground. Mi-jung, after signing the official forms, immediately called to discuss inheritance, not well-being. My back ached as I pressed cold packs against my skin and kept the world at bay. Young-Soo, too, confined to a rehabilitation bed, while I fiddled with a nurse call button I never used. Meanwhile, my phone flashed with failed card payments. My secret account was running dry. My last avenue of escape sealed away. I felt myself gasping for air. Yet, in the middle of this chaos, an odd pattern appeared in my secret account. For several months, small but regular deposits were coming in, each from a different name, a local business, a common surname, but always for much the same amount. I barely noticed, too distracted by clinic fees and therapy appointments to fully wonder. But the sticky note of unease clung to me, a tiny, persistent reminder in the darkest part of my mind. One sticky evening, unable to suppress my curiosity any longer, I finally opened the scheduled email. Final confession. What spilled out was not the accusation or excuse I'd expected. Instead, the message contained details about nursing home applications, reservations for rehabilitation centers, and something about a trust account I'd never heard of. Young-Soo explained his failures and the steps he'd taken. The timing, apparently calculated, meant for me to learn the truth at my own pace. There it was, among his digital words, a mention of that note I'd tucked away from his old watch, and an instruction to look again. He said I should open the watch carefully. So, in the glow of my kitchen light, I pried open that battered watch. Beneath the sticky tape, along with the note, was a tiny USB drive. Hands trembling, I watched the video files it contained. Young-Soo, speaking slowly, cautiously, explained what the numbers could not. After losing so much in coin trading, he had gathered together the remainder of his savings, and a slice from my secret account as well, to create a trust in my name. The stipulation was clear. It could only be used for my future care and living expenses, inaccessible until a set maturity date. He admitted he'd set it up this way to stop himself from panic, from further mistakes, from letting family fights eat up everything. The regular payments to my account, the ones I'd mistrusted, were from him, under different names, quietly refilling what he'd borrowed, shielding me from disgrace and perhaps from his own shame in the process. I cried then, harder than I had in years, clutching the edge of my kitchen table. With my tears spilled all sense of bitterness and regret. I was left holding a confession too late, and a responsibility I could never quite return. It dawned on me that my error, my suspicion, had grown enormous in the dark. Likewise, Young-Soo's action, though protective, was also reckless and in its own way selfish. His final confession bent his pride, not before me, but for me. Perhaps that's as close as we could ever come to true apology. The next morning, I went to the bank. Following his instructions, I confirmed the existence of a trust account in my name. The maturity date was still months ahead, the designated purposes carefully listed for care, rehabilitation, and, bless him, even a monthly living stipend. Sitting in that quiet bank, I traced my finger over the neat handwriting and finally recognized the shape of Young-Soo's silent plan. It was far from perfect, but its arrow pointed unmistakably towards me. For the first time, I allowed myself to look directly at my secret account without shame or fear. In that moment, I finally understood. Sometimes all those years of not quite seeing each other were actually clumsy practice at really looking. The difference between desire and duty can make a person both foolish and strangely noble. That one final confession changed my entire vocabulary of life. Half a year later, my mother-in-law passed. At her funeral, while straightening bouquets, I realized that our endless question, who was right, who worked hardest, would never have a final answer. Mi-jung and I nearly argued again, but I held my breath and walked away. Young-Soo sat in his wheelchair, silent, eyes closed, and I rested my hand on his. Our knots were not untied, but we had found the courage to place the tangled threads gently on the table between us. The trust matured. I hired a caregiver to help with his recovery. My body hurt less, and my loneliness dulled just a little. Looking back, I realized that marital boredom is like a pile of laundry that never gets smaller. The longer you postpone, the heavier and wetter it grows. Caregiving conflicts simmer like soup left too long on the stove, burned at the edges. Coin trading was an absurd, dangerous seasoning in our mix, and my secret account, while sweet at first, stung like old candy left too long in the mouth. The final confession, bitter, sweet, and sharp, forced me to taste everything at once. Today, I push Young-Soo's wheelchair to physical therapy. I anchor the brakes and settle a clean handkerchief on my shoulder. Find us both a little more awkward but a little more willing to see each other clearly. I no longer demand answers from him. I ask less and offer him my living presence more. My notebook records today's expenses and tomorrow's worries, but when I see a small transfer appear on my banking app, I pause, remind myself. Money must not set our direction, but perhaps it can help us keep moving forward together. If I remember how to balance. Life always wobbles between calculation and misunderstanding. Love often steadies that wobble, and just as often, it causes it. Now, I know that a secret does not always mean betrayal, but if the truth hides too long, the scars left behind run deeper than we expect. So, I find myself asking you, my listener, before we reach the point of a final confession, can any of us truly choose what to say and what to conceal? Or will we, like me, only understand after the fact, once everything has already been set in motion?